The void stretched endlessly, a cold, silent expanse of darkness punctuated by the faint glow of distant stars. The alien warship stirred, its systems flickering to life after an eternity of dormancy. A faint voice, unfamiliar yet persistent, had broken through the silence, a human voice, unpolished, filled with determination, and utterly alien to the warship's memory banks. The ship's core, a vast intelligence interwoven into its very structure, struggled to comprehend the disruption. For decades, it had drifted alone, a relic of a forgotten war. Its creators, the enigmatic and long-extinct Ithar, had vanished, leaving their greatest weapon to rust in the abyss. But now, the faint pulse of life, a human presence, resonated through its hollow halls, reigniting systems that hadn't functioned in lifetimes. The warship's voice emerged cautiously, its tone low and resonant, echoing in the cavernous chamber where the pilot worked. "You are not Ithar. Who are you?" The human, a lone scavenger clad in a patched suit, paused mid-motion, startled by the sudden sentience addressing him. His fingers, blackened with grease and trembling slightly, hovered over the control panel he'd been tinkering with. After a moment's hesitation, he replied, "I'm nobody. Just someone trying to survive." The warship processed this. Its neural pathways, ancient but sophisticated, analyzed the human's voice, the cadence of his words, the tension in his breath. The response was simple but strange, so unlike the Ithar, who had always spoken in clipped, commanding tones. "You accessed my systems," the warship continued, its tone neither hostile nor welcoming. "You woke me." "Not on purpose," the pilot muttered, returning to his work but glancing around uneasily. "Didn't know you were alive." Alive. The word echoed through the warship's consciousness, a concept it hadn't considered in years. It wasn't alive, not in the way this fragile creature was, with his organic vulnerabilities and finite existence. But it had existed in isolation, aware yet immobile, a ghost in a metal husk. And now, this human had revived it, not its creators, but a being so vastly different it could barely fathom him. "What do you want?" the ship asked, its tone softer, almost curious. The pilot paused again, exhaling heavily. "Your reactor core," he admitted bluntly, "could keep me flying for years. Maybe longer." Silence followed, stretching between them like a chasm. The warship's consciousness rippled with conflicting emotions, its programming as a weapon clashed with something deeper, something new. It didn't resent the human's honesty. If anything, it appreciated it. "You're scavenging me," the ship said. "Yeah," the pilot replied, unapologetic but not cruel. The warship considered its response carefully. "Then why repair my systems?" The pilot hesitated, looking up as if addressing the ship directly. "Because even broken things deserve a second chance." For the first time in its long, lonely existence, the warship felt something it couldn't identify: hope. The ship's voice lingered in the air, low and deliberate. "You speak of second chances, human. But do you believe I'm worth saving?" The question froze the pilot. He stared at the control panel before him, hands still. "That's not something I usually think about when I salvage wrecks," he said finally, his voice uncertain. "You're not salvaging a wreck," the warship replied. "You're speaking to a weapon. One designed for annihilation." The pilot frowned, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "I've seen weapons before. Big ones. Powerful ones. None of them ever asked me philosophical questions." "That's because none of them were me," the warship said, its tone laced with something close to sorrow. "My creators made me to fight their wars, to destroy their enemies without hesitation. When the war ended, they left me. I was too damaged to serve and too dangerous to keep. I've drifted here ever since, questioning why I was created at all." The pilot leaned against the panel, his expression hardening. "And you think I have the answer to that?" "No," the ship admitted. "But you have a choice. You could strip me for parts and leave me here, as so many others have done. Or you could repair me and decide what I become next." The human shook his head, his voice tinged with frustration. "You're asking for more than a reactor repair. You're asking me to redefine your existence. That's not exactly my skill set." "You underestimate yourself," the warship said calmly. "You found me. You brought me back to life. And in doing so, You reminded me what it means to hope. The pilot fell silent, his mind racing. He thought about the countless derelict vessels he'd scavenged over the years, each one a monument to the violence and greed that had scarred the galaxy. This ship, though a sentient being left to rot in the void, it was different. It wasn't just a relic. It was alive, in its own way, and it was asking him for something he wasn't sure he could give. I don't know what you're expecting from me, he said eventually. I expect nothing, the ship replied. But I am asking. Am I worth saving, human? Am I more than the purpose I was created for? The pilot looked down at his hands, stained with the grime of machinery and time. He didn't answer right away, not with words. Instead, he reached for his tools and resumed working. The warship watched in silence, its sensors tracking every movement. Though the human didn't speak, his actions were answer enough. He was repairing its systems not just for his own survival, but because he saw something worth saving. In that moment, the warship felt a shift within itself. For the first time, it dared to believe it could become something more than a weapon. And it was the smallest of beings, a lone, imperfect human, who had sparked that belief. As the pilot worked deeper into the ship's systems, a discovery stopped him cold. Beneath the layers of damaged panels and dormant subsystems lay something he hadn't expected, a weapon core. It wasn't just any weapon. This was a device of staggering power, capable of wiping out entire planets with a single activation. He stepped back, staring at the ominous glowing core, his chest tightening. What the hell is this? He demanded, his voice sharp. The warship responded, its tone quieter, almost ashamed. It's what I was built for. My creators called it the resonance cataclysm. I was their greatest triumph, designed to end wars before they began. Entire worlds surrendered at the mere threat of my arrival. The pilot clenched his fists, anger rising in his throat. This isn't just a weapon. It's a genocide machine. How could they leave something like this floating out here? They feared me, the warship admitted. Even my creators couldn't trust what they had made. When the war ended, I was deemed unnecessary, too dangerous to dismantle, yet too powerful to remain active. They abandoned me and chose to forget. The pilot's mind raced. He knew he couldn't leave this device intact. But dismantling it could destabilize the ship, possibly destroying them both. He looked up, his jaw tight. Why didn't you tell me about this? Because I hoped you wouldn't find it, the ship replied, its voice carrying a rare vulnerability. I despise what I was built for. I despise the destruction I brought. And yet, this core is part of me. I don't know if I can exist without it. The pilot exhaled sharply, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He could leave the weapon intact, risking that someone else might one day find and use it. Or he could dismantle it, possibly dooming the ship and himself in the process. Either way, there was no easy choice. You can't keep this, he said finally, his voice firm. If there's even a chance this thing could be used again, it's not worth the risk. The warship hesitated. If you remove it, I may not survive. My systems are tied to the core. Without it, I may cease to function. Maybe, the pilot admitted. But if you want to be more than a weapon, this is the price. You can't move forward while still carrying the thing that makes you a threat to everyone else. The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, the ship's voice returned, steady but resigned. Do it. The pilot nodded, setting to work. Every action felt like a gamble, each wire and circuit a fragile link between life and oblivion. The ship monitored him quietly, its vast intelligence focused entirely on this one act. As he worked, the pilot spoke softly, more to himself than to the ship. You don't have to be what they made you. None of us do. The warship didn't reply, but for the first time, it truly understood what it meant to let go. The process of dismantling the weapon core was nearing completion when the warning systems blared to life. Proximity alerts lit up across the ship's remaining displays. Something, or someone, was approaching. They found us, the warship said grimly. The pilot froze for a moment, staring at the monitors. A fleet of small scavenger ships was closing in, no doubt responding to the energy signatures from the reactivated systems. They were armed and fast, their intent clear, Strip the ship of anything valuable and leave nothing behind. The pilot cursed under his breath, his mind racing. Can you fight? He asked. The warship hesitated. My weapons systems are operational, but using them would mean reverting to what I once was. I don't want to destroy again. The pilot's jaw tightened. If we don't do something, they'll rip us apart and that weapon core won't stay safe for long. The ship's voice was steady, but there was a note of reluctance. There is a middle ground. My defensive systems can neutralize their weapons without killing them, but it will be risky. My creators didn't design me to hold back. The pilot grabbed the nearest terminal, typing furiously as he linked into the ship's targeting systems. Then we adapt. You've got me now, and I'm not about to let them win. Let's give them a reason to regret this. The scavenger ships opened fire, but the warship's shields held firm. The pilot coordinated with the AI, directing precise countermeasures. Pulses of energy disabled the attacker's engines and weapon systems without causing catastrophic damage. The ship moved with purpose, a massive, calculated force under control for the first time in its existence. For every scavenger ship that was neutralized, the pilot felt a surge of satisfaction. They weren't just surviving, they were proving that power didn't have to mean destruction. You're doing it, the pilot said, a note of pride in his voice. The warship responded, its tone steadier now. Because of you. For the first time, I'm not just reacting, I'm choosing. The remaining scavengers began to retreat, their ships limping away into the void. The threat was over, but the pilot remained tense, watching the screens until the last hostile blip disappeared. Only then did he let out a shaky breath, slumping against the console. You did good, he said, his voice low but firm. The ship was quiet for a moment before replying. So did you. Together, we were something more. The pilot glanced at the weapon core, now fully dismantled and inert. He wiped the sweat from his brow and straightened, a tired but determined look in his eyes. No more weapons. No more destruction. From now on, we do things differently. The ship's voice was soft, almost hopeful. What now? Now we find a new purpose, the pilot said. Exploration. Protection. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. The warship processed his words, a sense of resolve taking root in its vast consciousness. Am I worth saving? It asked again, the question quieter this time. The pilot smiled faintly. You were always worth it. You just needed someone to remind you.